Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Toby Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we talk about all things around personal development, professional development, organizational change, and a little bit of philosophy. We pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us, and hope that that's interesting for our listeners. So it's very spontaneous and unscripted. So we never quite know where it leads us. So Toby, it's our second to last episode of the year. One more before the at least the Western calendar year ends. The Gregorian calendar comes to an end. Are you ready for this very big and challenging topic we've got today?
We'll see. As you just mentioned, you never know where the conversation is gonna take us, really. So we'll see.
Yeah. So before we jump into the topic, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Did you have any afterthoughts of our psychological safety conversation last time?
Well, a little bit. Yeah. I mean, okay. Yeah. So last night I just came back from a kind of workshop or a leadership development program that I've been running for the last few months. And with this particular group, we talked a lot about. We always do, but in this group, we put kind of extra emphasis on psychological safety, and also in this organization that this topic has really matured. So when they do safety check-ins, they also talk about psychological safety, and I think you could really sense the difference with this group, that they were very much aware with it, or aware about the topic, about what it means and how you behave in these accordingly to promote psychological safety. And it was a fantastic group. It's I really felt like I mentioned that when I left the group, that I don't think I've ever felt so comfortable and involved in a group that I'm not really in it. I'm I'm kind of co in it, but facilitating the group. So just the importance of it, and how if you work with it proactively, you can really feel the difference. So that was fantastic. That was my kind of afterthought of psychological safety. Yeah.
Well, I actually I was trying to think about it in terms of how can we, because I'm a big proponent of personal responsibility and being proactive. And so I guess what I've been experiencing, and a lot of people are experiencing the last kind of more than a year and a half, almost 2 years now, where and it seems to be escalating, right? So there's a lot of negative news, and there's just a lot of uncertainty and anxiety and so on. And so I was trying to think of, psychological, how do you, we talk about it in the workplace, creating an environment where there's trust, and you feel comfortable saying, voicing your concerns and discussing things openly. And I started, after our conversation, I was thinking about, well, we're almost losing that in a social kind of setting. People have different views on because a lot of polarization, but also on the Germany's talking about vaccine mandates, and there are very strong views either way, and people, even if you're a professional in that field, people are feeling intimidated about being able to express their opinion because they will be categorized as one thing or another. And so I was thinking about, for me, I've even reflected and found that it's having an effect on, because I'm usually a very optimistic, positive person, and it's kind of worn me down a little bit the last 2 years, to be totally honest, even though I have my meditation practice and I try and do all these things for good mental health. And so, the whole psychological safety thing is, I was starting to think about it from an individual level. How do we create a space where we're not overwhelmed, and we can feel comfortable, expressing ourselves, and make other people feel comfortable as well, and so on. And so, I don't know. It's something that I'm going to continue thinking about. But I know for me, having time away from all the news. I mean, it's so easy now at a touch of a button, you can just get inundated with lots of negative news. And I think also in the personal conversations I have with people, not and trying to kind of keep the conversation in a direction that makes everybody feel comfortable enough to be open and to say. So I think I was thinking about how we focused on that as a very organizational business kind of topic, and I realized that there's room for that also in our personal relationships, our friendships and our social gatherings and so on, right? So
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, that's interesting. I mean, what I'm hearing is if the macro context is bringing a lot of, say, well, unsettling things, anxiety, etc., then it's even more important to have some kind of social context where the psychological safety is really high. So you really can feel that, here I can actually express my feelings and emotions and talk about these things. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's important for a lot of people to think about the judgment that they place on others, the labels they put on them, and are you giving people space to be comfortable to share their fears and concerns without being ridiculed, and so I think that's a really important message for the current times we're going through, because I think everybody just wants the best for themselves and their families and their communities, and so I think the almost level of hostility that sometimes comes up around certain topics, I think is something to be aware of, and just to give everybody the space to be able to share that, right, and feel supported, right? So
Yeah.
That was the thing that came out of the last conversation for me, and I think it can be taken to the personal level, and I think that's it's important for us all to kind of help support each other rather than create our in groups and those are the out groups and be attacking them and so on. So because I was actually thinking about the was it Milgram who did that test where they were there was an experiment where someone was apparently being shocked and they were, whenever they made a mistake on a test, and then the person who was actually being studied was the person applying the electroshocks to see how far they would go, and so I was thinking about that in terms of how far are people willing to go to criticize each other or push people to the limits and so on, just because they think it's right for society or whatever. So anyway, that's going off on a tangent, but it's funny because that was the experiment that kind of came to mind, and I think anyway, that's getting way off topic, but
yeah, but actually that just made me thinking about that Stanford prison experiment.
That's very similar. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, how the extreme influence people can have on each other in these kind of groups. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where you're definitely not creating a safe environment for others, and it really polarizes and causes a lot of harm, right? Long-term harm on both sides of the fence, because then when people reflect, and I live in Germany, obviously there's a pretty negative history, even when you, sorry for going way off on a tangent when I only just wanted to make one small comment, but there was ages ago watched a documentary on Adolf Eichmann, the guy who was instrumental in organizing, the concentration camps and so on. But he was just a bureaucrat. I mean, he just saw himself as doing the right thing for his country, his political party. Like, it's incredible to look at it now and think that how could you have thought that? But he was just so committed and convinced in his way of and the current trend of thought and all the people who surrounded him, and so it's just important to make sure that we don't get so polarized that we start to, be so extreme with each other that we put other people in danger that way.
Yeah.
So anyway,
these are pretty extreme examples, but yeah, I mean, sure, it really highlights the extreme consequences if you don't have any. I mean, now we're talking about psychological safety, but yeah, if you can't voice your concerns and your
yeah,
opinions, then
because then you'd have no one challenging ideas have momentum. I started writing a blog. I'm going to be posting it in a while, but the momentum of ideas, and when you all of a sudden you have you have groupthink, and you have people that they become so convinced of their way of thinking, it can create so much momentum that you lose track of. And when all dissenting voices are not given room to even express themselves, you get this righteousness and this momentum of these ideas that could go totally off the rails, and bring you in a total direction that you never intended to go, never expected to go. Obviously the examples I give, there were extreme ones, and there was it thrived on a lot of the negative beliefs and stereotypes and things of just a few people, and it just it became viral. And I think those are things we just need to reflect on and remember, in times in our history when we let ideas go so off the rails that, and without questioning them and without giving people the room to express their concerns, it gets us off track. So anyway, I think that's enough said on that. Sorry, it took us totally off track there. Probably 15, 20 minutes of just our afterthoughts, because we have actually a really big topic, and we might have to break it into parts. So for today, I was originally thinking about maybe talking about the importance of language, but I think what I'd like to talk about today is something we really take for granted. For granted is our communication, and so that just really wanting to get people to reflect on how important communication is and how complex it can be, because we take it for granted. I see people, they get we've all had the experience where someone tells us something and they get frustrated because we don't understand them. Like, we're speaking the same language, but we don't understand what they're trying to say, and so we put the onus on the listener. I'm being clear. I understand what I'm trying to say. Why can't you understand it? So I think just remembering how complex it is and how important it is, and the thing that I hear experts talk about it again and again. What makes people successful, what makes a really successful person in business or in life, is their ability to communicate. And that's why it's so important to teach our kids how to express themselves, to, in our education system, to have so people can learn to write well and speak well. And it's not about showing how educated you are. It's about being proficient at expressing yourself and sharing your ideas and engaging with other people. So, and that's, I think, what makes successful managers. That's what makes relationships successful. So I think the topic of communication is extremely important. And yeah, so I apologize for taking up the first third of our podcast on our afterthoughts. But I think communication, and maybe, as you say, we'll come back to it. But that's the topic I'd like to cover today, and I'd like to hear your thoughts and see where the conversation takes us.
But as you say, it's a really big topic. So to kind of frame it, or at least to have a starting point, and then we'll see where it takes us. But that would be sort of how, in what manner, in what way you provide a message or provide information to someone else. I mean, we can talk about listening and receiving it. Well, a lot of different issues. But should we start with this, the part of delivering a message or delivering information? What that means?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I want to share today. But I think the way when I do a communication workshop in a business context, I'll usually get my flip chart out, and I'll do my two stick people, and I'll just break it down for people how what looks very simple and how it become complicated. So I have my little stick person with, here's the idea, and then they verbalize it, or maybe it's in writing, and then there's the person at the receiving end, and then they're taking it in either auditory or visual, and then that creates a picture in their mind. And then I ask, so what could go wrong here? and
or
so
emotionally, right?
yeah, exactly. So and then we get into, what are all the things that cause interference? So the beliefs, perceptions, the mental state, the emotions that are at play around the topic, what it's triggering in the other person, and so on. And so I think that's a good place to start, to think about things that we communication seems so simple. And I think that's why some people get frustrated. Well, look, I'm being plain in what I'm saying here. Why aren't you understanding?
Just get it.
Yeah, and so we have, I think, good communication takes a degree of empathy, and it's taking responsibility, right? So the just because the other person doesn't understand it, it's not their fault, right? You have to equally, both sides taking some responsibility for the give and take of any kind of communicational exchange.
Yeah. So yeah.
Was that a good place to start?
Sure. I don't know what the place is, but let's try. I think we all can recognize, certain persons or certain situations where you just feel like, oh, it's so easy to talk to you. It's so easy to communicate with you. And what is it that is doing that? And I think you're right. First of all, that the receiving part is showing an interest. Then it makes it a lot easier. If you're sitting and nodding right now, and that makes it a lot easier for me to sort of follow.
We're on the same page.
But follow cues and see, that. So your part of the act of listening is making it a lot easier for me to express myself and to understand that you understand what I'm saying, etc. So that makes it easier. But if we start from the deliverance part, I think it's really difficult sometimes to choose your words. Choose what is the actual word that describes what I'm trying to say right here, especially if it's in your second or third language. If it's in your mother tongue, it might be easier. But the benefit of delivering a message in another language is that you have to think another round. What is the correct word here for what I'm trying to express? So that's something that I really appreciate with language, that it makes you cognitively think another round about what is the right word here. What does this word mean, and what is it that I'm trying to what is the message that I'm trying to convey? So if I know that, and I'm quite a reflective individual, so I'm slow and I think a lot when I'm speaking, so sometimes it takes a long time. But I think it's worth it, to stop and sort of try to digest words that you try to express when you're delivering the message.
Yeah, it depends on the situation for me, because sometimes when you're having a conversation, it's just kind of a stream of consciousness, kind of, you feel comfortable enough to just let things come out as they sort of percolate in your brain. But I think the point you made about the having different languages is an interesting one, because I'll coach people in German, and obviously English is my first language, but I'm pretty fluent in German, but sometimes the word won't come to me because I have it in English and I don't have the German word or whatever. But what I've been told is the good thing about it is when I have German coaching clients, so we're doing a session in German, it puts the pressure on them to be more clear about what they're trying to say. Because even if we were speaking in both of our native languages, we sometimes take it for granted, right? So, well, you'll know what I mean. You'll know what I'm trying to say. But I like what Eckhart Tolle talks about, how words are just a pointer, right? He talks about them in terms of they're just pointing to an idea. They're a representation, and I think it's important, when we think about language, that we'll use a word, and this is another interesting thing about having multiple languages, where you can see, there's sometimes not a word in German that we have for an English word, or vice versa, right? Yeah. And so it's just interesting how we both know this concept, but we we can't put the right word behind it, right? And so I think you're right. Having people who really love language and who really like I love to write and having this sort of creativity and this passion around creating because when I write fiction as well as nonfiction. And I love this painting a picture with your words, right? And so you're actually creating this visual. Someone could actually close their eyes and picture what you're describing. I love being able to achieve that. And so obviously in our day-to-day communication, we're not going to go that deeply. But it does, I think that's one of the main points that I want to share today is just the importance of being precise and being effective with the words that you use, and I think language can, and this is kind of why I thought maybe we'll just do a thing on language, but it can separate us too, right? I mean, look at teenagers will be separated from the older generation. They'll find their own words and language, their own jargon to use in different industries. It's what makes us, this is how we know you're an expert or you know what you're talking about because of the words that you use, and so we use language to kind of suss each other out. And then the other thing that you pointed out was me nodding my head. It's really important to remember that more than 70% of our communication is nonverbal, and that's why when you feel this connection with people, I think it's this you can really sense on so this is where our unconscious is picking up signals. That we do so much communication that's then our unconscious communicates with us in more in feelings than in thoughts, and so we get this sense of connection, right? And so it's important to be. I think another great message is it's just important to have this level of awareness. What am I communicating with my body language, with the way I'm expressing myself non-verbally, and what are the words that I'm using, and then just making sure that you're taking responsibility for that. I love Stephen Covey's seek first to understand and then to be understood. No, seek first to understand the other person and then to be understood yourself. I think I got tongue-tied there. What do you think of that?
Well, I think we touched upon that a few times already.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that highlights the importance of that receiving part of communication, really to show an interest, and it's a lot more than being eloquent or semantics and using your language, just really to tie in with the individual, and I mean, talking about psychological safety, that's one of the parts that makes that possible. So what is your context? How do you set up that successful communication platform? And there's a lot of trust and relations and the social context that comes into play there. So it's not only about, it's let's just say that it's so much more than just information sharing and language and spreading. It's a big part of it, but when you break it down like that, it's a really, really big playing field.
Absolutely. And this is where I have a bit of concern about the way we are evolving into these one line. We have Twitter, we have they've extended the amount of characters you can use now. It's become somewhat of a toxic place depending on what you're talking about. We have we have people sending emails and they think there's if I will tell people if it's really important, pick up the phone or arrange a call, arrange a in-person meeting, because you're missing a lot of the nonverbal communication. And from your perspective, you've been very precise, but because you have context, you have so much more information. And so it's just so important to be aware that, what your intentions are in your communication. How are you making those known to the person that you're trying to share that with, right? Your intentions behind what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean that's a classic. When we talk about change, that's classical. That you're delivering a message that you think that everybody's going to receive it and be very happy about it, positive. But then they're sitting on the other side of the room and thinking about something completely different and just having a completely different view on it. This
Mm.
sucks. I don't want this. I said, why don't you understand me? Well, and there you go. So yeah.
And I also find it funny that we're okay. So we're using the aid of emojis now to help us, put the because we don't have the body language, or we may not. We're concerned about not our intentions not being clear, or the tone of voice not being clear in our written communication, and so we add emojis, right? And
Mm.
so I wonder how that is affecting our ability to communicate when we we're sending text messages and we're relying on emojis to kind of be the main form of communication on what we're trying to say, and then it becomes less authentic sometimes because you'll have this huge smiley face and it's just kind of, or LOL is kind of the laughing out loud, like how
Mm.
much do you actually do that, and yet for every little kind of funny comment, you LOL, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm on the floor laughing, like honestly.
Yeah.
So I think authenticity in communications is worth a lot. So yeah, I think the way our communication is evolving, and the way, not just in the workplace, but I think within our communities, within our relationships, I think it's just so interesting in such a short time. The way we communicate has evolved. How long have we had smartphones, right?
Yeah.
It's not been that long. So
Mm. Well, it's so vast, right? The
yeah.
the amount of communication that is surrounding us. I mean, it's just mind blowing. Just yeah, think about. I don't know. For some reason I think a lot about lately how it was during the age of the Vikings. You hardly saw any people. Like how
How
did you?
fitting for a Swedish guy to think
Yeah, I
about
know.
that.
It's winter and it's cold. How did people survive? It's right. No, but like, how did you communicate then? You didn't know anything about the outside world, and you got some news once a year. And how did you speak here with your loved ones and etc. Maybe that's a bit off topic, but getting back to that, the vast amount of information that makes it diluted perhaps, and also like what do you actually pay attention to, and what's in your span of interest and your conscience, right? So I mean, when you're speaking to a lot of people, some of it just get filtered out and you don't even listen to it, right? And I think that's kind of natural. So that's also one of the reasons why I appreciate our conversations here. You can just sit down, speak to people about something that you think is interesting, and really just focus on the conversation. And then, you never know where it's going to take us, but it's a really nice kind of practice.
Yeah,
Mm.
just having the time to just share ideas without any with less time constraints, and without such rigid. It doesn't have to be a one-liner, and that encapsulates everything that you wanted to say. I mean, that's
Mm.
not possible. And actually, your point about the Vikings, you can, any kind of ancient cultures had these rituals around campfire, whether it's the African bush people or the Vikings or any kind of ancient peoples.
Mm.
I think the way we passed on information was through telling stories,
Mm.
and so we don't take the time for that anymore. I mean, this is, I think, the reason why I love great fiction, and a lot of people love great fiction, is because there are really interesting messages woven within that story, and
Mm.
deciphering it and interpreting it is interesting for me, and then looking at, well, how does that make me feel, and just it puts you in a different world, and gives you a different perspective. And I think that I think in our fast-paced communication of modern day,
Mm.
some of that gets lost, and even the art of storytelling, when you look at it in terms of modern entertainment, right? There's this formula to how to make a great movie, and it's we talked before about Joseph Campbell's the hero's journey,
Mm.
and he's got this archetype, but I think that it's been oversimplified for some of the for some of the entertainment we take in, and I just wonder, is the next generation learning to communicate well, and do they have enough awareness around what's needed to be a good communicator, whether it's in business, whether it's in personal relationships, because you see kids on the subway, and they're sitting beside each other and they're sending each other texts and they're pointing to their screen. They're not talking to each other, and I really wonder what's that going to lead to in terms of our communication, because communication is the reason we have been successful as a species is because language. It's one of them. Our ability to cooperate is one, but language is such an important one. We're able to convey ideas. We're able to teach. We've evolved so quickly, and in large part through learning through language and our ability to share ideas. It's a huge part of our development. And
well, couldn't you say that? I mean, your ability to communicate lies the foundation for collaboration or for cooperation. Then,
big time, yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty maybe a pretty quick hypothesis, but let's make that assumption. But I do think that kids nowadays they're learning they're learning to communicate in a different way, as we just said. I mean, the information, the amount of information that they're getting, that they're spreading, that they're involved in somehow is just enormous, right? So I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't share that concern that they're not learning to communicate, but it's a very different context, and perhaps the depth of communication is sometimes lacking. But I think I'm pretty sure that most of the kids understand the importance of it, and I mean the importance of it when it comes to relations and care, or sharing information with the people that you care about, and to be able to collaborate and cooperate in a good way.
Yeah.
But I started laughing just before because yesterday I was evening I was talking to my son, and I tried to get him to read a bit before he went to sleep, which it's a good habit. He wasn't up for it though, and he said, "Why do I have to sit and stare at some dead wood with ink on it?"
Really? That's hilarious.
And we had a little bit of a, not argument, but a discussion about that. What's on that ink and what creates the stories and the colors and the information in the stories. And I just thought about that when you mentioned kids nowadays and their perhaps lack of interest in going deep in communication and stories. And we talked about storytelling before as well, so I just thought about that. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting because it's what we're comfortable with, and I love the tactile. Like, I know a lot of people have their Kindle, or they do most of their reading on a screen. In fact, I do most of my reading on a screen now because of email communication or so articles you can read online. And but I still love having a book in my hand and turning the pages. I enjoy that. It's probably because that's what I'm used to. But then you have generations now that are they're just used to reading everything. It's just so much more practical. You can have on one device. You can have thousands of books and at your disposal. And so I think it's just where your comfort zone is. But again, for me, the thing about today's discussion was really like raising a level of awareness about how important communication is and the things we take for granted, and just understanding that I really hope that communication doesn't become this lost art form. So there's been a few dystopian movies. There was this one, and I can't remember what it's called now, but it was the U.S. president was some I don't know, some wrestler or actor, and it just and the whole country had become dumbed down, and some guy from the past had the highest IQ in the world or something like this, because who was very average in his time. So So, I'm not saying this is where we're headed, but I think if we lose the art of communication, I think that's a concern for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, made me think, man. I have an American friend who he hopes that the next American president is going to be The Rock. Talking about an ex-wrestler.
Well, he's an actor. He does know how to articulate pretty well. I think it's just does he have the ideas and the the experience to actually lead a country?
He can communicate with his muscles,
Yeah.
No, all right. Anyway, that was off topic. But yeah, I'm thinking about I'm reflecting back on some occasions in my life when I feel like I haven't been able to communicate properly, and I don't really understand why. I'm trying to convey some kind of message. Maybe in some situation I'm feeling a bit insecure or not sure of what I'm talking about, and I feel some hesitance or sense that kind of reluctance or something in the receiver of this communication. And why is that happening? So why am I not always successful in my communication? Is it because I'm feeling insecure, or is it because I don't know how to express myself, or is that the other people are stupid, or what's going on there? What do you think?
Well, I think it's really important to not to jump into those assumptions about, well, geez, what is this person, stupid? I'm being very I'm being very plain. Love how you're using the emojis there. For those listening, Tobi and I discovered that Skype now has a little emoji button that we get to play with. Yeah, I think that's a really important point is not to jump to conclusions, and I find myself in lots of different situations. So we've all been in a relationship, and we brought up something, and it triggered something in the other person, whether it's a friend or a partner. I've had a lovely dinner with someone that all of a sudden went wrong because something totally innocent that I mentioned got taken the wrong way, and then you're trying to figure out how do I navigate out of this. Yeah. But then the same thing as I'm especially in coaching, language is really important, and so I'm trying to ask the right questions, and then if something kind of goes off off track because you just for a split second you just lost your train of thought or whatever, and you put something out there. I think the same thing can happen in any area of life, and so I just try and take a breath, regroup, let the person express themselves, and then try and have empathy, try and put myself in their shoes. Okay, how did they maybe take what I just said? Look, the reason I wanted to bring up this topic is we've been for thousands of years occupied with this. I mean, Aristotle was talking about models of communication, right? And from there, for a long time, people talked about things in terms of linear communication. Then it was interactional, and then now we talk about transactional. There are models around transactional communication, and so. There are just so many different ways of looking at it, and it's so complex that I think that this is why we need to respect how challenging it is, and take it upon ourselves to improve how we communicate, take responsibility for the things that we're saying and the emotional responses that we have. I find a lot of people they will say things in a way. Well, they'll want to trigger a response from someone. There's some kind of an intention. They're wanting to manipulate someone. But I think if you're wanting to have productive conversation, it's important to understand your own intentions, and then to be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes and empathize with how that might be impacting them. Because you'll have people, I don't know why you're getting so upset about this, right? Think about the kind of things that people will say that try to go that they try to not take responsibility for their own communication, right? And I think that's a big first step, whether you're in a leadership role, whether you're in your relationship, taking responsibility for, making sure your communication is effective, and really, if your intention is not to provoke, then taking responsibility when you have provoked someone into an emotional response, right?
Yeah. But could we say also that we making this overcomplicated? People have just been communicating with their friends and families for thousands of years, and is there a big issue? I mean, obviously, the question here is how much attention should you spend on this? I think it's really, if you want to be qualitative in your communication, it's really important to be authentic. But at the same time, it's also really important to know your audience and understand the context that you're in. So I don't communicate the same way with you with my kids, for example, or with my bunch of friends.
Absolutely.
There's a very different style of communication than when I'm speaking to professionals at work or whatever. So, and I remember quite clearly when I was a lot younger, but I was spending a lot of time with a bunch of friends, and we were communicating in one way. And I called back to my girlfriend at the time, and she didn't understand what was going on because I changed my way of speaking, perhaps, or I was using that way of communication or using certain words or accents or whatever, and I didn't really think about it. I was just in that context, and that got really, really uncomfortable with her. She didn't really, what's happening with you, and it just shows the importance of the social impact that you're in. And it could also be depending on where you're working and who you're working with. I mean, there are certain communities and professions, perhaps in most countries, that you communicate in one way, and when that way clashes with another profession or another industry, it's like, oh, you guys are so different. Are you really? But you're just using different words and different putting emphasis on different expressions and stuff. So what I'm saying is, I think it's important, if you want to be effective, I think it's important to be authentic. So you know your own way of communicating. You know your own, and maybe trying to develop that skill as well. But at the same time, also to understand who you're speaking to and that audience, and be flexible. So there's a fine balance there of being authentic, but also being able to adapt to the situation. And I think that's a really difficult skill.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think maybe because you and I are both fairly self-reflective, I mean, there's pros and cons to that, because I find it also leads to me having a very strong inner critic. But I think you're right, having a certain degree of reflection, and that's what I mean about taking responsibility for your communication, just because. I agree with you. In different situations, I'll talk to different. When I coached high school kids, you're trying to make a connection. You're trying to meet them at their level, right? And my ex-wife, she was for a while she was a technical writer, and it was interesting. She was told to write at a grade 8 level for the organization, because it was a government organization she was writing for, and it's interesting. You've got to try and get your communication to the sort of the lowest common denominator sometimes, in order to make sure that everyone understands. So there's a big difference between communicating broadly to a bigger group and communicating one-on-one. I think you can make more adjustments with the one-on-one conversations, and I think probably that's why I love the I love the coaching. It's a lot of one-on-one. I feel a lot more comfortable one-on-one rather than in big groups. So it's sort of my introverted nature, and so I think understanding who your audience and the person you're talking to is a really important one, and adjusting your communication for that accordingly. Yeah. Do you have any? I guess, do you have any tips for people to I'm drawing a blank here.
To
Help
what?
me, help me.
To communicate more effectively.
Yeah, to make that adjustment to recognize the people that you're talking to aren't, you're. So I've had this when I was giving a workshop to people. There were different languages, right? So the common language was English, and then you're trying to explain something that can be maybe a somewhat complex management topic, and in a way that everybody can understand. So I guess I had to, just like we just had just now, I had a moment where I had to pause and regroup and think about, okay, what am I trying to say, and how can I say it more effectively so that everyone will understand. And I think sometimes we get into panic when we're trying to communicate, especially if it's in a group, or if you're on a podcast and you've got people listening, waiting for you to get on to your next idea, and you suddenly get into a panic. I think it's important to take a second, okay, take a breath, regroup, and get refocused on what you're actually trying to share with people.
That's a great tip, I think, and something that I probably do a lot. Take a break but be comfortable with it. Don't panic. We'll get, and then just, if you really don't know what to say, just what do you think? Start asking questions. but to that point, I mean, when you're communicating, and that happens for me frequently in workshops and these kind of situations, that I'm not really sure where I'm going, or I might draw a blank, or what you just mentioned. Nice. And but then stop and ask, well, how do you understand this? What do you think that I'm trying to say, or what do you think about this? So really just conveying with the audience, or with the other person, what do you think, and what does this mean to you? And especially if I'm doing it in another language. I mean, for me, I work maybe half of my time in Chinese, which is my third language, and there are certain words, as you said, that you can't really translate them, and I don't have the level of the language as the natives. So I might introduce a concept or a word or something like that, and then how would you translate this? What does this mean? And then just by translating and putting a little bit more meaning into the translation, rather than just translating the word, explaining what it actually means, it provides a lot of context for the information, and I think that's really, really helpful. So for me, that's a benefit, to be able to do that, to utilize these kind of things. And also sometimes, what does the character look like, and sort of digging into that, and sometimes that can be of benefit as well. But there's a lot of different techniques, I think, that you can utilize. So, I mean, stop and ask questions, of course. Explaining, looking at it from a language perspective. What does this word, or what does this meaning actually mean, or the sentence, what does that actually mean? But also looking at the facial expressions. I mean, if you're talking and people are looking confused, then that's, or uninterested or whatever, that's a warning sign. So just, okay, stop, and then, as you just said, well, it's time to take a break. How can we redo this, or rewind a bit? So and what I probably do mostly is to ask questions. But we talked about storytelling before, so okay, let me see if I can exemplify this, or let me take an example, or let me tell you a story, or something like that. Just using different ways of communicating.
Yeah, I think maybe that's where we could shift into is some good tips for healthy, effective communication. I mean, there's plenty of people who are more expert than me on this, but certainly I think I wanted to have this conversation to raise the awareness around how important communication is, because I think a lot of people take it for granted. But I think in terms of giving people some tips, look, there's lots of good communication models. The 4 sides model is one. If you want to look that up, you can.
Could we just explain that a little bit? What's the 4 eyes model?
So
that?
it's, well,
Well, it's
It would
something.
take me a little time to get into it, but I think there's some really great short YouTube videos that'll explain it to you in 10 minutes around just understanding things from different perspectives.
That's also about the visionary, the audio, isn't it? About these, we don't have to get into it, perhaps, but just to put it in a little bit of context, isn't that also about, how many percentage of communication comes from different sources? I mean, as we said, there's language, there's audio, there's visionary, there's body language,
Yeah, it's
emotional. Yeah.
yeah, it's about looking at the situation from different perspectives. Your own, the other, the context. So there's just
Oh, okay.
so
Yeah.
it's
Sorry. I got
so that
confused. Yeah.
without going into too much detail on it. So that's one example of a model you can look at for your personal life, for business. But I think there's a few other really good guidelines. I've mentioned before the 4 agreements. Don Miguel Ruiz, who talks about that, and it's come up in a few even business conversations where they're like, okay, he's a kind of a spiritual guy, so some people, don't like the religious aspect of his writing, but the fundamentals of, don't take things for granted, don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions. Be impeccable with your word, and then always do your best is the fourth one. But I think be impeccable with words. So if you're honest, if people recognize that you're honest and authentic, there's going to be a level of trust there, right? There's going to be a level of psychological safety there, and then don't take things personally, right? So when people are getting emotional or getting upset about something, and recognizing the state that they're in and not taking it personally, they're just upset right now, right? And then we make a lot of assumptions in our community. So people are saying something, and then you read into what they're saying. You've made, or you don't have all the information. You don't ask a question to try and get all the information. Instead, you make an assumption, right? So I think the 4 agreements is a really good one. At least 3 out of the 4 really important in our communication. So I think, and I already mentioned the Stephen Covey one. I think there's a lot of little pointers that we can have there for people just in their day-to-day communication, but also on a business context. And then in office settings or in business settings, just so often people in a position of authority will. So this is especially important for leaders, where you don't take responsibility for. It's like, I was clear. I made it plain for you, and all these self-confirming statements about what you've done, and the other person didn't understand, and you're putting all the responsibility on them, right? And it's like, clearly, if the message hasn't been received, or if people continuously don't understand what you're saying, it's time to reflect on your mode of communication. You may think you're the best communicator in the world, but if continually it goes wrong, it's like Simon Sinek I bring this comment he says a lot of time. I heard him say once, and I bring it up a lot. It's I go, what all my failed relationships have in common? Me. Right? Because so if everything's going wrong, you're probably the common denominator. So and so taking some responsibility, I think, is really important, regardless of your experience and because we may be used to communicating with certain people all the time, and then you're thrown in, like, imagine you're used to talking to people in a business context, and then you're thrown into trying to talk to kindergarten kids, right? That's going to be a challenge. And I remember some friends of mine. One of their kids is my godson, and we were driving in the car and talking about something, and they asked me a question if I liked. I think we were talking about a fast food chain. I won't mention the name, and they're like, why don't you like that? And I'm like, Well, the for me the food kind of tastes artificial, and that was a word that was too, and then their parents had to go. They won't understand what you're trying to say. Right? This was a number of years ago, and so it's really, okay, how can I adjust that, and then my pivot. I thought about afterwards how I could have said, well, because his oldest son was at the time a fan of fast cars, like race cars and stuff. They watched Formula One, and I said, well, imagine, if you've got a high performance car, are you going to go to the the gas station and put in the super premium fuel, or are you going to put in the cheapest fuel possible, right? And then he would probably said, well, yeah, the best fuel. And I'm like, well, do you think that that food from the fast food chain is the premium fuel for your vehicle, or is it the cheap is the worst? So and that's an interesting one. We talk a lot in metaphors, and metaphors are a great way because I talked about how Eckhart Tolle talks about how words are just pointers, and that's why I think a lot of these big concepts that we have difficulty containing within our language, we all often try and do it with, especially emotional stuff, right? It's hard to translate into words. We use metaphors. We use we use ways of creating that emotion or painting that picture, or creating a link between concept by taking something you already may be familiar with, or that you may identify with, or something that is important to you, and then you use it to make the comparison. So I think that's another really good tool to be able to use is creating those kind of pictures for people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something that you can relate to. It's like, yeah, okay, I can. If you bring up a metaphor that makes sense to you, then yeah, okay, I can put myself into that position, and then it makes it a lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's in communication. It's that's a really important thing, is to make that emotional connection, right? You said, communication flows much better when you feel like you've got a connection, but when you feel like you're just talking past each other, then there's frustration, and you don't feel that level of connection with people. And I think that's why, we do this in coaching, but also in sales. You try and develop rapport with people, and so you ask some questions. You try and find some common ground first, and then you get into the other things. And so I think that's another really great skill to learn if you want to be a better communicator.
Yeah. I mean, just paying attention to that rapport. I was going to say, I mean, to your emotional intelligence, but yeah, I mean, really using all antennas to connect with the individual and trying to understand what's working here and what's not working here. And you get a lot of cues from facial expressions and body language, and when someone starts nodding, okay, then now we're on the right track.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just thinking about how on emails, there will be people who start with, hey, how's your day going? Or hope you're doing well. And then they'll get into what they want. And then there's people who jump right in. Hey, listen, I got this issue, and you'll have people that do the same even verbally. They'll, you'll storm into someone's office, or you'll phone somebody up and, hey, listen, I got this issue. And it depends on maybe how well you know them, but you'll always be more effective, and you'll always put people more at ease if you start with, hey, how's it going? Well, actually, the reason for my call is, or you try and you make that human connection first with people, and find out what state they're in. How are you doing today? And at least show interest in them before you sort of jump right in with, here's my issue, here's what I need from you. And sometimes you get caught up in things, and I catch myself sometimes, and this is the really good thing about email, is you can go back and go and then add a little friendly, maybe I should be a little friendlier first before I get into what I want. But I think when you take some time to think about how what you're trying to express is going to be received, you'll be a lot more successful in the way you communicate.
And I saying that, I think there's a lot of room for creativity there as well. Yep. I mean, you can, in how many different ways can you say, how are you doing today? how's it going? And I mean, in Chinese, but you usually say, "Hey, have you eaten? What did you eat today?" That's the way of saying how are you doing. But it can also be, I love that in different situations, just when you have time for it, like being a little bit creative. So, what's been the most interesting part of your day today? What was it? That's a classic. How you ask questions with your kids. Was it fun in school today? Or you get a yes or no answer, but then so what was the highlight of your day today, or just stuff that and like that. What's worth celebrating?
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh, mm,
that's a great one.
mm.
It's funny. I didn't realize that the Chinese had that. Have you eaten today, or what have you eaten?
Yeah,
I
true.
always thought what does ni hao translate to?
It's like you good. Yeah, well, it's
You
like
good?
hello.
You
Yeah,
good?
yeah, but that's how you say hello. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
Mm.
Listen, I think maybe we could probably wrap up there because I think with these big topics we get off on tangents. I know I do, and then I lose track of where we were trying to go. But
Mm.
listen, my intention for today's conversation was really to raise the level of awareness around for people to continue to always work on your communication.
Mm.
It can always be improved, and just remembering how important it is. So for anyone listening who's in a business environment or in a leadership role, just reflecting on how effective am I as a communicator,
Mm.
and then if you want, if you're having trouble with your relationships, whether it's friendships or in your community or whatever, more often than not, it's going to come down to communication. Things that you said, how you said it, how effectively you conveyed certain information.
Mm.
That's going to be such a huge part of the quality of your relationships.
Mm.
So, success in so many ways depends on how well you can communicate. So if with your kids, it's great that you're encouraging them to read and to be good communicators. But anyone who you can help to communicate better will be more successful in life. So
Mm.
that was my biggest intention for today, to
Yeah. And by
awareness and
saying
reflection.
Yeah, and by saying that, it's not only about, what's the amount of adjectives you can use, or what's the most difficult words you can utilize. It's really also about, I mean, being more professional and expanding your expertise in language. That's one way, but also about, that connection part, and be able to understand your audience, and understand who you're speaking to and how they understand the message. I think that's equally, or maybe even more important, actually. Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
and I think about the one of the things I'm hoping that having these conversations with you is what will do for me is that it will help me to articulate better, and because the way my mind works, I go off on my brain goes into so many different directions. I often have to reel myself in,
Mm.
and so. And so maybe that's not a great thing for this format, because it allows us to just go off on tangents. But I mean, in terms of better public speaking, the good thing about when I'm giving a workshop, it's more structured, and I can keep on track. But
Yeah.
I'd really, it's an area I'd like to improve on in terms of public speaking and being very focused with my ideas. So I think this kind of a forum is a good challenge for me to become a better communicator, and
Mm.
to spontaneously get my ideas across in a way that other people can understand.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think
Yeah, likewise.
yeah. So good. Well, look, let's leave it there.
Yep.
I hope that our conversation has helped raise people's awareness about how important communication is, and where some of the stumbling blocks are.
Mm.
If anybody needs resources, I think Tobi and I have probably lots of them. You can reach Tobi through his LinkedIn page, Tobias Demker, and through my website, peterteuscher.com. We certainly have lots of, I mean, I think you and I have both given lots of communication workshops, and I think maybe it's this whole, the pure volume of different ideas and models that you could use. Actually, one really important one, geez, I can't believe I didn't get to it earlier, but you know, the nonviolent communication is a really important one that I think we didn't even jump into.
But let's take a part two. I want to share something later as well about a fantastic experience I had with some deaf trainers. So
Wow.
we'll do that next time. Yeah?
Okay, we'll do a part two, because Marshall B. Rosenbaum's his whole thing around nonviolent communication is super important, and it's all about taking more responsibility of your words. So yeah, I agree. Let's do a part two, and then maybe we can take apart a few different models, like the Four Sides model, or you know, there's a few different ones that I think we can look at. Even there's, I think there's 8 different models within that, the linear, interactional, and transactional sort of frameworks. So I think we can even pick from those. So we'll do
5 languages. Yeah, we'll do part two. Maybe,
we'll do a part two, and we'll bring some actual models to the conversation. But today I think was just more about raising awareness and getting people, because I think over the holiday season, for those people who, you know, in the Western world who this is a holiday season for them, we get a lot of people getting together, and it's funny because it's not funny actually. My stepfather was a fireman, and he said the most domestic in Canada, you call the fire departments the first responders. So even for domestic disputes, they don't call the police; they'll call the fire department. Kind of funny. And so the most escalated, like the most kind of disputes, and they happen over the holiday season, over Christmas, and it's because it's people who maybe don't communicate well, don't get along, and they are forced, or they force themselves to come together because they're family. And I think a lot of those kind of issues and confrontations could be alleviated with better communication. Okay, well, listen, thanks everyone for joining us. I hope it's been an interesting conversation and got you thinking more about communication and how you can take more responsibility for that, and where you may need to improve. Toby, I'd say this has reminded me of some areas I can probably improve in communication. Any last tips, any last words you want to leave with people?
Not really. I mean, just what we mentioned. It's a huge topic, and it's easy to talk about it, but it's when it comes to actually implementing effective and good communication, it's not very easy. So, you know, what's the balance about thinking about your awareness and actually just doing it, because it's something that we do all the time.
Exactly.
But let's come back to it and put it in a different context.
Absolutely. And
but maybe we should also mention what we have, what our plans are. Huh?
Yes, I was just about to say that. So the next episode we have will be the last one of this year, and so you know, I have a lot of rituals that I, you know, at the start of the year or looking forward to the new year, and you know, as we talked before we got online, with you know, I know. The calendar years, the Gregorian calendar is kind of a Western thing that we all use, and it's just a human construct. But it's a good kind of reason to regroup, reflect, and make plans for the future. So I think our next episode, we want to share some tips on what we do for the end of the year, planning of the new year.
Yeah, sort of a tying up the year episode.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we can
tips and content.
Yeah, we can reflect on some of the episodes we've done, because we started at the beginning of the year. So you know, this will be a good time to reflect, and we'd love to get your feedback. We can even share it with people. You know, the things you liked and hated about our podcast, and we can make some commitments to improve for next year. So yeah, any feedback or any comments or questions you want us to cover in the year-end episode, that would be great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, well, until then, I would say thanks everyone for tuning in, and I look forward to a great year-end session for you guys to all join us. All right.
See you next time.
All right. Thanks, Toby.
Cheers. Bye.